Lesson number 98, and here we're just going to have a quick look at countries around the world and have a quick look to see, well, is a country going to do well or badly. And one of the very surprising things during this lecture is that it's Mexico and America that are the rising global stars, and even good old UK is holding steady, it's doing okay. So this is Mexico, which is a rising global star. Now what happened to Mexico in the 1980s and 1990s? China came along and its industry was so dynamic that a lot of Mexican firms started to close down. However, then between 2006 and 2013, Mexico started to take off again because productivity rose very, very rapidly in Mexico. Secondly, they benefited from the shale gas that was occurring in America, so the energy costs also went down, and they got loads of foreign direct from Sharp, Sony, Samsung, and Foxconn. Now, presumably also, the reason why they invested there was because they've also got very good free trade agreements with the North American Free Trade Association. So their country has done very, very well indeed. Now, so according to the Boston Consulting Group, their wages may well have gone up by 67%, but sales productivity has gone up by even more than that. And on top of that, the Mexicans also have a very hard work ethic. So what they're trying to do in Mexico right now is they're trying to improve their infrastructure, they're trying to improve their investment climate, and they're trying to lower energy costs. Now, if Mexico can pull off all those three things, it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to be able to get export-led growth, which is very, very good, and then their country will develop. So therefore, Mexico is now seen as a rising global star. What I'm going to do next is put up some information also from the Boston Consulting Group about how well America and Mexico are doing compared to other nations. Thank you. I think this chart here gives a pretty good indicator of what's going on in the world today. Now, Mexico and the United States are rising global stars. Now, I never would have believed this. I would have said, okay, if you'd asked me even maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said, come on, here, like America's got this very large trade deficit. It's got a huge budget deficit. It's got a huge trade deficit. 1 in every 100 Americans is in jail. It's had its time. China's going to take over and everything else. However, that may not be the case anymore. And this really shows what's been going on. So we look at the whole world economies. Now, wages in America have risen by 25%, okay, from a much higher level, obviously. Mexico by 67%. The average for the other top 25 countries is 71%. So in a way, America and Mexico are sort of catching up with the rest of the world. In terms of productivity though, there's been a massive rise in, well, American productivity has gone up by 20%, Mexico by 53%, and the average in the whole world is plus 27%. But this, once again, this will be from a much higher base, obviously. The currency though, the currency in America has remained flat. In Mexico it's fallen, whilst in the rest of the world it's gone up for the other countries. The natural gas cost has fallen in America, fallen in Mexico, and in the rest of the world it's gone up by 98%. That's a massive turnaround in advantages. And finally, the electricity cost is also much lower in America and Mexico. So it's really in these two areas here that America and Mexico have really caught on. And in the other areas it's also improved. So suddenly these now are seen as the rising global stars and the place to invest. They also have the added advantage that America is a huge market. So if you can produce your own goods in America, then you're going to save in lots of other ways as well, which is greater speed and flexibility in terms of producing your goods. So Mexico and the US are the rising global stars. We're now going to look at those countries which are holding steady, which includes India, Netherlands, Thailand, and the UK, believe it or not. Thank you. In the Boston Consulting Group fall into the following four categories. Now we have under pressure countries, losing ground countries, holding steady, and rising global stars. Now I must admit, when I first saw this, when I first read this report from, I think it was from 2014, I was shocked to find out that it was America and Mexico who were the rising global stars in the world economy. But primarily the reason for that is because of the falling energy costs and the shale gas and the moderate wage rises in those particular countries. Whereas places like Brazil and China have very high wage increases. in those particular places. Poland and the Czech Republic have been hit by much higher energy costs, and Russia is quite clearly going through a very hard time at this moment in time because of the fall in the price of the oil, and the whole economy is related to the oil industry and the gas industry. They're suffering from the Dutch disease effect, and so they've obviously got severe problems right now. Right, okay, so let's put a bit more meat under this then. So traditionally, these are the low-cost countries, but fundamentally they've got deteriorating competitiveness. There's a lot of reshoring now going on. So originally the manufacturing moved to China. It's now moving back from China to other nations. For instance, Foxconn has moved a lot of its plant from China to Mexico. Okay, those countries that are losing ground are those countries that have large welfare states, high wages, and inflexible labour markets. So a lot of these countries are in Europe. Sweden, Belgium, France, Italy. Got Italy down twice on there. So they've got weak productivity, high wage costs, high energy prices. So therefore they are suffering right now. And they've also got large debts, etc. Those countries, and I'm going to have a look at India in a second or two, which is a really interesting country because that really could take off. It's got a lot of advantages, but it's not quite getting there yet. But in the UK, for instance, we're also in this band here, right over here, the UK. Well, I've applied this to the UK. So we have a falling exchange rate, which helps us out. Our wage costs are pretty steady, but productivity is still weak within the UK. We do attract a lot of FDI, and we do have a flexible labour market, which is why we attract the foreign direct investment. So I think you've got to look at each individual country here to decide how well it's doing. But those are the reasons why. That is the reason why the UK is holding steady. It's also a gateway to Europe. India has got a massive advantage in terms of its labour. It's one of the cheapest places to produce goods in the world today. However, it hasn't got a particularly flexible labour market, and there's a lack of training and everything else. But India could well be ready to take off. That could be the country that rises on here. Now, the one thing about this report that actually I found quite interesting, which I've just thought of just right now, is Africa on here. Africa right now is now a $2 trillion economy, but people think by the 1950s Africa may well become a $20 to $30 trillion economy. Now, they've got the cheapest costs in the world today, but they may not have the right infrastructure to take advantage of that, although that is now changing. So if we look at the world picture, right, surprisingly, the UK is pretty well placed to do well in the future, as is India. So if you're looking at this from a purely strategic point of view, right, Mexico, because you've got the large market of America close by, falling energy costs, and India are the sort of places that you might want to go to in the future. I'm now going to have a look at India. Thank you. Which is holding steady, which is India. So India is holding steady along with the UK and the Netherlands. Now, why is that? Well, India has a massive low cost advantage because of its labour force, and there has actually been pretty strong productivity growth in India. There's a falling currency, and there's not been a lot of wage growth. And the electricity and natural gas prices have also fallen. So therefore, you'd think it'd be in a really strong position to take advantage of growth in the world economy. However, let's just take the textile industry, where labour cost is very important. India produces its own cotton fabrics and garments, but most of that is then exported to China and Bangladesh. So therefore, why hasn't India taken off? Well, one of the problems is there's loads of regulation in India, there's a lot of corruption in India, there's a lot of labour laws, it's a difficult place to do business. Because the electricity isn't there all the time, sometimes you have to have expensive diesel power, and the government is trying to rectify this through having special economic zones, whereby all of these facilities will actually be in place. So basically, India is a country that needs fundamental economic reform. The good thing about India is that it is a democracy, and it is pretty stable, and it has a very good work ethic. So you need fundamental reform in terms of labour, energy, and also investment regulations. And then India could also become a rising global star on the world economy. But let's hope it still stays The next case we are going to have a look at is Australia, and Australia seems to me to be a classic case of the Dutch disease effect of when they got loads and loads of resources. They got loads of resources that were pumped out of Australia, so therefore Australia in the short term became much richer. That sector was guaranteed to give very high wage increases, so they got high wage increases, but then they got a high exchange rate. Wages went up across the board in Australia, productivity didn't rise up at all, Australia didn't need to innovate, and all these factors then added, and including a rising exchange rate, to a much smaller manufacturing sector. And in fact their car industry used to produce 400,000 cars a year, and now they produce 200,000 cars a year, and that may even go down further. So there was an explosive demand for coal, oil and natural gas, so those industries did really, really well. Even in the recession of 2008, Australia continued to do well because of the demand from Asia. So there's a massive rise in resources. The manufacturing sector didn't take off. Australia now has very high production costs. On top of that, it's got a high exchange rate because the demand for their currency has increased, so therefore their currency's gone up by 21%. Australia is the worst performing out of all the 25 countries in terms of the global manufacturing cost competitiveness index. So it's a combination of factors. Energy costs are going up, productivity actually fell, manufacturing wages went up by 48%, and Australia's currency went up by 21%. So what can Australia do now? Well, there is some glimmer of hope if it goes for the high value manufacturing. But we're going to have a look at that a bit later in terms of the 10 big mega trends that these countries can take advantage of. So once again, it's a pretty surprising story this. The rising global stars, Mexico and the USA, the countries that are losing most, Australia, France, Italy, Switzerland, right, they're not doing particularly well right now. The UK, India, Indonesia and the Netherlands are all holding steady. Okay.